Sarah Davey.
And I'm James Routledge.
And this is Books Unpacked.
Join us as we chat to people from across the publishing industry to unpack the life cycle of a book.
Pop the kettle on, get comfy, and we'll get started. Hi Alice, it's lovely to see you. How are you doing today?
Hi Sarah, hi James. I'm really well, thank you.
So Alice, do you want to just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
So my name is Alice Murphy-Pyle and I'm Head of Marketing and Publicity at HarperNorth, which is a Manchester-based imprint of HarperCollins.
So Alice, we're not going to be too shy about asking the silly questions, okay? So obviously within really big kind of mainstream publishing, marketing, publicity, these are obviously jobs that I think most of us have heard of. Now, when it comes to your role, I mean, how are those two things combined and how do you end up kind of splitting your time between the two?
That's a really good question. So my background was marketing. So I did marketing for about 10 years. And then in this role, because HarperNorth was starting from scratch, so we didn't have any backlist books, which means when we kind of opened the doors, we were starting from absolutely zero when we acquired all our authors. We didn't have any presence whatsoever in Manchester. So we started off from a tiny little team, and I basically lobbied to get this job because I was absolutely desperate to carry on working in publishing, but also live in Manchester. So the marketing side is broadly everything that is paid for. So things like outdoor advertising, digital advertising, radio, some podcast advertising, and then anything that's kind of earned. So things like press reviews, blog tours, events, those sorts of things, they come under publicity. So my job sounds relatively grand in that I'm head of both of those things, but all that means is that I kind of sit with each of our books and make the decisions about where we're going to focus the energies on from title to title. And then I also have a slightly more strategic role where I kind of clump books together if they're so for example, if we've got two nature books, I might think about how we pitch those to journalists all in one go, and I also get involved with the cover art and also the general acquisition process as well. So I meet all of our authors and get involved with the process, everything from acquisition to publication and beyond.
So in terms of, obviously, it feels like quite a lot altogether in different publishers. Marketing and publicity would probably be separate. I work run book festival events, so I tend to work with a lot of publicists. Do you feel like, I don't know, do you feel like, is it quite a lot doing all of these things together? Do you feel like you wish there was two people doing it, or is it manageable? Or?
It is manageable. It's a big job. I'm really, really lucky because I have a small team who work alongside me. So there's a publicity manager, Hilary Stein, who works with us. And then there's Taslima Khatoon, who's our publicity and marketing assistant, and she's fantastic. So there's three of us who work across it. So sometimes you just have to be okay with the fact that you never get to the end of the work. And I think the activities of authors and things like book festivals are really, really important to make sure that, the word is getting out. It can't always just be one person banging the drum for the book. It has to be part of a wider team. So if you do start to get stressed, sometimes just thinking, okay, I can rely on this team, that is really valuable.
So Alice, obviously you've already mentioned that HarperNorth is an imprint of the larger kind of HarperCollins company. To what extent do you think that you're given kind of the freedom with, I'm talking HarperNorth generally here, but, obviously you're doing your own commissioning, you're doing your own editing, you're doing your own publicity. Because it fits within the HarperCollins family, I mean, is there any input from the larger kind of Harper world, or are you allowed to kind of get on with it? I mean, how does that kind of work?
So we are allowed to get on with it. We have kind of as much control as we want. So in our office, there's a small team, and we have a managing director who's actually in London. So she is the managing director of Harper Nonfiction as well as us. So our sales function runs from London too, and our finance and production are also run out of London. So the kind of creative aspects of the role are done from Manchester. So we are on the ground and we're quite close to lots of our authors, and we can kind of call on the broader HarperCollins wisdom when we want it, but for the most part, it varies from department to department and sometimes from title to title as well. So, for example, I haven't necessarily worked on lots of cookery titles in my career. It just has fallen that way that in recent years I haven't done very much cookery. So, for example, if I was going to work on a title, I might call in a favour from another publicist or another marketeer and ask them how they, managed to make a success of their books. So the broader team are managed from London in terms of the managing director is there, but we have our publisher is in Manchester, and we make the decisions. We bring the authors to the point of acquisition, and we take them through to publication. So our non-fiction editorial director is a guy called John DePaya, and he's absolutely prolific. He's always full of ideas, and our fiction editors are absolutely brilliant to bring a really, really wide range of authors through to publication. So we kind of speak to the other teams, but most of our work is fairly independent of the rest of HarperCollins, but we can kind of rely on them when we want to. And our CEO is a guy called Charlie Redmayne, and he's really interested and has been a real champion, not just through HarperCollins, but through the broader company as well, to make sure that we're kind of taking those northern voices to that global audience. And our motto is books from the north for the world. So we try to think, what's the global reach of each of our books? We're publishing for northern people and for northern readers, but they're not just northern stories. They're stories that have relevance not just in this country but across the UK and in the other territories as well that we sell into. So we're always kind of thinking about that international reach as well for much of our output.
Yeah, because that can be an issue with anything where you're looking at a specific area or genre or group of people, that I can end up falling into stories that are stereotypes. And I think when there's because I'm a northern writer, you worry that people are looking for the northern working class story about like whippets and flat caps, but why would people around the world want to read about that? And there can be quite a lot of, say, working class fiction. I'm saying working class, but there's a lot of working class fiction coming from the north. It's trying to find something that has got that wider appeal, because you do want other people to read the stories. So I'm guessing you do have quite an open commissioning process, I think, don't you, as well? And people can submit directly to you without agents, I think.
Yeah, they can. So, we try to have quite a broad view of actually what the North is as well. So we realise that we're in Manchester, which is practically the Midlands, but we know that the North is not just one type of story, like you say. It's not just whippets and pies and chips, although that is very nice. So we're just as interested in stories from like inner city Bradford as we are in stories from like Cumbria, Carlisle, and we also encourage people to self-select into the North too. So we publish quite a few Scottish writers. We've got a couple of Irish writers as well, actually, too, and some Welsh authors. So we've done a couple of bilingual campaigns. So Genevieve Pegg, who's our publisher, is a fluent Welsh speaker. So she has helped me to translate many a press release into Welsh. And, in terms of the bit where it gets a bit murky is the kind of Midlands, where, you wouldn't necessarily say Oxfordshire was prime HarperNorth territory, but if somebody feels like a real outsider, we wouldn't turn a book down just because somebody was maybe 10 miles down, because you can't really draw a line to say what's northern. So we do say, does this feel like a HarperNorth book? So we've tried to build that culture quite slowly, and I think starting from no books has been helpful in that, because we can take each book on its merits and think, where is it going to sit on our list and who will it complement? So that's been quite useful as well.
I was just going to ask one thing, because we're trying to make sure that people know what we're talking about, and you mentioned the term backlist books before. Can you just tell us what that means, what backlist books are?
Yeah, so backlist is a really interesting concept. So I know that some other publishers call it core publishing. So what that means is those books that are going to tick on and sell a few thousand, ideally a month, but maybe 10,000 a year, and that then starts to bring profits, and you don't necessarily have to do too much in terms of publication, like publicity around them. You can just publish, maybe reissue them, and then they'll keep on selling for years and years and years. And that those books for us, because we did start from 0 books in 2020, so we've got a few kind of backlist or core titles now. So probably the one that most people will have picked up in a bookshop would be Northerners by Brian Groom, which has been an amazing success, and he's just published in hardback his second title, Made in Manchester, which is just as fascinating. And that's a real core title for us, so that will become our backlist, and that will sell. Every Father's Day people will buy that for their dads, every Mother's Day they will buy it for their mums, and it's a really interesting, funny and relevant read that's been incredibly well written. So backlist just means those titles that will sell on and on for years to come.
Brilliant.
Alice, I know obviously you're kind of wearing a publicist marketing hat, kind of looking at the kind of wider publishing world. Obviously you're wanting to champion Northern voices and that kind of idea of the North. For Northern writers and Northern creatives, one of the biggest issues is the kind of North-South divide and kind of breaking into publishing, it typically very London-based publishing. I was wondering, as somebody who's in publishing and particularly marketing and publicity, yes, you're wanting to kind of give a platform for these Northern voices, but do you feel like you're pitching more to the South than you are to the North? Are you selling your books? Are you marketing your books as Northern books just to a Northern audience? Surely not. You're wanting, obviously, everybody to read. So do you think you're putting more effort in people and bookshops, maybe particularly in the South, selecting your books? Is that a slightly harder sell for you?
That's a really good question. And I would think basically we work with, so as HarperNorth we have a rep who's a guy called Adam Murray, and he sells our books into bookshops. So I would say broadly we probably do more events in the North. So we have we work really, really hard to have good relationships with lots of the bookshops, so the indie bookshops and the chains of bookshops in the UK. I don't know why I'm being shy about naming them, but like Waterstones, for example, and they've been like huge champions. But then we really value, I think one of the things that we've excelled at has been our relationships with individual bookshops and sometimes individual booksellers as well, because we can see from our sales numbers some shops are selling insane numbers of some of our books week on week, and that is absolutely amazing. Probably outside of the North, our biggest audience is in London, so I think sometimes that's expat Northerners, but certainly we try not to be like parochial with our output, and like certainly for me, I'm quite a niche reader in some areas, so I love a local history book. I love reading about specific rivers, specific roads, but unless that has relevance outside of the readership of that geographical area, it probably wouldn't be a HarperNorth book. We might kind of work with an author if they had an amazing idea and say this isn't actually for us at this stage, but either say would you think about rewriting it to broaden it out a little bit, or we might even say how about XYZ publisher. So I think we try not to kind of close ourselves off. I think we do more with Northern bookshops, but our authors go all over the UK and internationally to talk about their books at things like book festivals. So yeah, we're kind of open to it. But we want every single one of our books to be a bestseller
Yeah, of
to
course.
for whatever that
Yeah.
looks like for that book. So we kind of think about, what would success be? Obviously, not every book can be a Sunday Times top 5 bestseller, but success sometimes might be 3 or 4 broadsheet reviews, or even, a certain number of ebooks sold. We kind of think about each book in its own way and what success might look like.
I wonder if we can come back round, because I'm interested in looking at that about how you work with different books, and I wonder if we can come back to the publicity and marketing role a little bit. I'm interested in what stage you come in. So at what stage of a book's sort of acquisition and commissioning does market and publicity start to get involved? Is it really early, or is it a bit later? Or
It's super early, so sometimes it's before we've even got a book. So sometimes I'll say to editorial, have you seen XYZ person being funny on Instagram? And then put that marker down. And sometimes, I'll kind of see somebody who's, written something interesting, and I'll send that over. So I'm quite a voracious reader myself, and as I think most people working in the industry are. So sometimes I'll take ideas. We do have like ideas meetings as well, so we'll all sit and like brainstorm ideas. One of the things I really, really love is we have these like IP meetings. So that means kind of ideas that we've originated that we might send out to an author and they would write the story. I love doing that. And that's always quite fun. And then you kind of match an idea with an author. And then for the kind of acquisition process itself, so how it normally works with a book that's agented is that they would send it in to us. We would have a discussion, and then there would be a meeting either in person or on Zoom, and then we'd say this is our vision for the book, and then if they like our idea we would make an offer, and then if that was accepted we would publish. And then that can be anything from, on average, about 6 months to sometimes 18 months after we've acquired it. So if it's non-fiction, normally they have to write it, and if it's fiction, normally it's written, but we like to have a long round up and drive to publication so we can make sure the booksellers have had a chance to read it. And so it just varies really, but I do get involved. So tomorrow I've got meetings with an author about a book that we probably wouldn't publish till 2026, but I will go and say, oh, this would be the marketing campaign, this would be the publicity campaign, and then if it matches with what they think, they might go away and think about our offer.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that timeline is really interesting because, I mean, before we started, we were obviously doing a bit of research and we're kind of looking at HarperNorth and looking at the list. I think we are quite comfortable with, the books that you've already published, but I always get quite excited by looking ahead and seeing what publishers have got coming up. And I can see, you've already got listed books right up until kind of midway through next year. With publication dates already, which is amazing, even though some of them don't have covers yet, and some of them don't have blurbs quite yet. At what point in the promotional timeline do you start putting feelers out to reviewers and newspapers and bookshops? I mean, obviously, if it's an 18-month, sometimes 18-month publishing process, we're already looking at books coming 2025. You're working on books coming 2026. I mean, when do you start, say for a jacket, when do you start sending that out to, is that social media? Is that newspapers? Do you send that out to specific people? Because I imagine a lot of your job is very visual, so you need to have this material already.
Yeah, exactly. So like broadly, we like to have the covers signed off 6 months before publication. We can do things quicker. We've done books on real shoestring turnaround, so within a couple of months, including the writing. So one of the books that we signed up, in fact, it was the first one we ever published, which was about Liverpool's Premier League winning season by Melissa Reddy, and I think we signed it up in July and we published it in about October or November. So she went away and wrote it, and then we published it for that autumn. So we can do things quicker, but what it's really good to do is to build up that sense of understanding about where it will sit in the market, and make sure that reviewers know about it, booksellers know about it. So we spend quite a bit of time like visiting bookshops, and we have evenings where we might talk to booksellers about our upcoming titles, and they're normally done around 4 or 5 months before publication, really. And with some ideas, they take ages, and sometimes we might even ask people whether they think a certain idea might work. So sometimes even before we've got an author, we might think, oh, would this book work as a concept? Sometimes booksellers ring us and say, oh, I've heard that there's a book about XYZ footballer or singer or comedian, have you heard about that? And they say, we could do this event, we could do this bit of promo if you're the publisher, and that's quite nice. And then to send it out to journalists, it's normally about 3 or 4 months before, so we'll have proof copies about 6 months ahead, and then we'll send them out between 3 months and 6 weeks before publication. And then sometimes we'll send more books out when we have finished copies, which is about a month before publication. And then with things like radio, we would confirm that it's about 3 weeks before publication. But sometimes I found since COVID, publicity's fallen closer and closer to deadline, and sometimes post deadline,
Sure.
post on sale date as well. And sometimes you'll chase for ages, and then someone will just ring you and say, oh, can you do it tomorrow morning? And then there's a big scramble to get somebody to like Media City if it's BBC Breakfast or something. So sometimes there is quite quick turnaround on it.
I'm interested in kind of what tools are at your disposal, Alice, because more and more you're seeing, obviously, Book Talk is such a huge part of kind of promoting new books coming out. I mean, have you embraced TikTok yourself? I mean, as HarperNorth, are you using Instagram? And obviously Twitter's a big kind of or has been was a big tool for industry. I mean, are you on the kind of social media bandwagon? Or I mean, you've already mentioned radio and newspapers, so I kind of have an assumption on your answer, but what do you think?
Yeah, so I personally am about 20 years too old, I think, for TikTok. But we have a range of people who are very good at TikTok. So it's not something that I personally get involved with. I did have it on my phone, but I had to delete it because I just found I was spending like 3 hours just looking at TikTok videos of, how to make the perfect apple pie and things like that. And I just find it such a drain on my time. So Taslima on our team does a really good job of looking after our HarperNorth Instagram, which is HarperNorth UK, and she manages the Twitter as well. And then we have a HarperCollins TikTok, which is managed by a very impressive woman called Christina Sweeney. So they do things like TikTok lives, and they sell books on TikTok too, via the TikTok shop. So all that is really, really fun. And, it's interesting for somebody of my heritage of years in the industry, because, I remember when Facebook was the big thing. I remember when Instagram was the big thing. There's always some new way of parting people from their money. But I think really the underlying linking factor is just enthusiasm for books. And I think people just want to hear about fantastic stories. They don't really mind which platform it is. Kids publishing is normally the most pioneering in terms of digital marketing on social media platforms, so things like Snapchat. And I've seen them come, seen them go with like QR codes and all that kind of stuff, and then they've come back around again, QR codes. And it's always really interesting. But I think broadly, Facebook is the best platform in terms of conversion rate, because it's that slightly older audience, and maybe people have a little bit more time to dwell on there. But the in terms of that long tail, by which I mean the, selling books in sizable numbers for many months beyond publication, that comes from bookshops, and you can't synthesize that anywhere. So the kind of power of long tail comes really from booksellers and their enthusiasm.
Yeah. In terms of the social media as well, writers are quite often told that they've got a better chance of being published if they've got a really strong online presence. And you probably know a lot of writers don't want to have any presence. They just want to write, like let somebody else deal with it. But I think especially I've been watching a couple of people lately who've got books out next year and watching the process of the book being made, and they're documenting it very strongly, but how long it takes. And all, like, there's a proof going out at the minute and it's a one without a proper cover, and then there'll be another one with a cover. And I think it feels exhausting. Like if I had to write my book and then spend 2 years promoting it, does an author have to have this kind of online presence? How involved do they have to be in marketing their own book? Or can they be like, no thanks, you do it?
Like, I would say people don't need to have their own social media platform, but I think you have to either have an amazing book that's absolutely outstanding, or somebody who could do that for you, so your publisher would give it the best shot that it possibly could. So I think, if you compare it to other entertainment industries, so for example the music industry, if you think about how people are going to find out about your book, it's the same if you're a musician. If you've got amazing songs, people spend a lot of time, they're not watching TV really in the evenings, they're looking at their phones. So being out there in a way that is palatable is usually relevant, and I think people do flog themselves into the ground to try and sell their books, and sometimes they feel like they have to be the one to do it. And I think there is a really important role, and I would never want to cut out authors' own contributions, because I think some authors, when they get it right, and I would say many authors actually, can positively drive sales, but I don't think they have to spend any more than a few minutes a day talking about their books online or engaging with people. So the most important thing, and this is across fiction and non-fiction, is engagement with social media platforms. So anybody who makes a comment on your social channels should be replied to. Those sorts of bits of engagement are really important, but I think lots of authors feel like they have to be kind of all singing, all dancing. They have to be flogging themselves to promote a book, and I'm not sure it's always the best use of their time. But I think having some way of getting the book out so people can understand that there is a book there is very useful. So building a relationship with a local bookshop, that's probably the number one most important factor. So somebody outside of yourself is talking about your book, and supporting other authors is a really good way of doing that too. So I think rather than feeling like you have to dance on TikTok, finding a way of authentically talking about this story, which presumably means a lot to you, otherwise you wouldn't have spent a year of your life writing it. That's a good thing for any author. But I mean, during acquisitions meetings, unless somebody had a massive social media following, we wouldn't necessarily factor it in terms of whether or not we would take the book on or not. It would be about the strength of the book itself.
It's interesting because I can't remember, it was when I was running the Northern Writers Studio, and there was someone from a publisher told us that for non-fiction you need to have a social media account with like 10,000 plus followers. And I remember at the time I didn't have a chance to be like, what are you talking, really? And a few people afterwards came to me and were like, I've only got 500 and they're all my cousins. It's, is it different with fiction and non-fiction? Is it easier if someone's established, I don't know, say if someone's writing about psychology, is it easier to sell their book if they're established in their field than if they were just do they need some kind of something behind them to sell the fact that they know about the non-fiction subject, or is that just not the case?
I would say for non-fiction, the question that sometimes comes up in acquisitions, and I suppose for readers as well, and that's the reason that it's mentioned in acquisitions, is why is it you who has to be the person to tell this story? So what is your voice driving people to think about this book? You know, why are you the authority? So if you're writing a book about, I don't know, relationships, and how to have great relationships, but you've got no online presence, then what is it that you're saying that other people can't? So, you know, I've worked on lots of authors where at the time of publication they haven't had any social media platform whatsoever, but they've had some sort of reason that they're the person to tell the book, to tell the story that's told within their book. So yeah, it's a more helpful kind of way of showing that people will listen to you if you have say a newsletter. So I think newsletters are really, really important because you can drive pre-orders. If people are going to spend time listening to you talk in either a podcast or a newsletter, that's a really, really valid way of showing that you have an audience. So it does vary quite a lot, but I don't think people need to have 10,000 followers. They just have to be able to show why it is that they're the expert in their area.
I think what I found really interesting, I mean, just picking an example out of kind of recent HarperNorth books. I mean, Caro Giles, 12 Moons, I thoroughly enjoyed. I mean, I've spoken to Caro a couple of times, and I think it's, you know, a unique voice, but a universal story. And I think what I really found interesting, especially with the promotion of that book, is certainly on Caro's end, is more about her writing process or about the time that she spends writing rather than actually trying to flog the book itself. You know, she would get up every morning, she would light a candle and she would write, you know, for however long, doesn't matter how long. And that was kind of it. And that was kind of all she needed to say about being a writer. And actually her engagement was huge. And actually a lot of people are kind of following her writing journey more so than probably the final outcome, you know, which obviously is this brilliant book about, you know, the Northeast Coast and about motherhood and about all sorts of things and about kind of lockdown and what have you. So many of those things that are, you know, so easy to engage with an audience up north, but universally as well. I thought it was such a fantastic book, and I was just wondering if you maybe had a couple of examples of books that you've worked on, not just HarperNorth, but I guess that would be slightly more relevant, but something that you could pick out where the journey of that book from inception through to kind of being out in the world is something that you've really enjoyed working on, and you've seen the process of that and really enjoyed the way that it's been handled by HarperNorth and by the author as well.
Oh, that's a good question. I think Caro is an example of an author who's just the most phenomenal writer, and HarperNorth as a team are so proud to publish her because her writing is so beautiful. And I think that's a really good example of the specificity of she, you know, she's writing about really a couple of miles around her house, but actually most of the book is, you know, her house, the beach, the streets around her, and she just builds this world. And you know, she's somebody who definitely didn't have 10,000 followers on social media, but she has kind of written this book 12 Moons about life with her 4 daughters, you know, who are kind of living together in this kind of slightly separated world, and she just makes Northumberland seem like the most amazing wild place to live, and she writes so beautifully. And I think she you know, uses her social media to create a world where she shows, you know, she brings you in and she shows you how she's writing, and you know, she's kind of, she's, you know, she has a master's in nature writing, and you know, she's used the incredible skills that she has to, you know, link in with other authors to do festivals. You know, I've heard her speak and she's fantastic, and you know, 12 Moons is a very HarperNorth book because it's a story that lots and lots of people would like to read, but it's very, very rooted in the Northeast. You know, she couldn't have written it elsewhere because it's so geographically aligned. And then in terms of kind of HarperNorth books that you know, have been involved with from the start. I mean, lots, you know, there are so many stories that we've talked about from you know, concept stage to publishing and beyond. So I think one that I've really enjoyed is a trilogy called the Bingo Hall Detectives series by Jonathan Whitelaw.
Mhm.
And they're set in Cumbria, in Penrith, and it's a son-in-law and mother-in-law who kind of solve murders, and that's just been really, really fun because the author Jonathan has done, you know, tours around the Lake District. He's done like some very, very specific like local news coverage, and you know, with the like local arts coverage in Cumbria, but then, you know, he was at Bloody Scotland. He kind of has done lots of traveling, and you know, the books have sold really well in Canada where he's kind of currently living as well. So you know, that kind of specificity doesn't limit it, and I think, you know, HarperNorth books aren't like parochial. They're stories that anybody can enjoy, but they're just rooted in the North, and that's a balance that we have to kind of quite finely meet. And I think any idea where you think, oh, what would we like on the cover, and then, you know, you brief an author, and sorry, you brief a cover designer, and then they take away something and they bring back exactly what you think. That's amazing, and that's really lovely. And I think like Ellie Wood's covers are designed by a really talented artist called Sarah Whitaker, who lives in York. And you know, we kind of talked during the design meeting, and I think that was Ellie's view as well, about having, you know, a real Lake District scene where it was, you know, based on a very specific place that you could go and stand. And then Sarah just created like exactly what we would have dreamed of, and that's been, you know, that's always really nice. And I think we feel very, very close to the successes of our authors. We feel very involved with all of them in a way that is probably quite unusual. And then, yeah, I think any campaign where I've kind of got a great sense of achievement, it's always been where I've put lots and lots in as well. So, you know, sometimes you just think, oh, I would buy this book. I would buy 5 copies of this book myself. And that always feels really nice to, you know, to be able to think, I know exactly who the readership of this is. And you know, that feels exciting, whether it's someone who I've like admired for a long time or someone whose books I've read you know, growing up. So, you know, some of the kind of career highlights that I've had have been working with people like Jackie Collins, who I used to read as a teenager, and Jilly Cooper as well. That was really, really exciting, and being involved with that from, you know, what the cover might look like, you know, kind of chipping in my ideas on that, and you know, seeing a photo shoot take place. That's always quite exciting. And then, you know, you have an idea and you brainstorm a cover line, and then you see it on an advertising poster. That's always brilliant. So it's quite nice to have that time to have the ideas, and then seeing them out in the world later is always really brilliant. And I think, you know, it's all the, you know, the success comes down to the author, but we're closely behind, kind of cheering them on as well.
And I mean, Jackie Collins does seem like quite a big career highlight, but is there anybody you think, oh, I wish I could market and sell their book? Is there anyone who you really wish you could get your hands on?
Oh my goodness. I think, yeah, Jackie Collins was a great like career highlight, because I was quite junior when I first started working with her, and I thought she was going to be petrifying, and she was actually so professional, and told us loads of stories. I think the one author that I'd love to, I can't imagine she'd ever be published by HarperNorth, but I love Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way and many other books like that. I think I've read pretty much everything that she's written, and I think her inspiration for creatives across the world is unparalleled. So I would love to get the chance to work on a Julia Cameron book one day.
Obviously, as I was saying before, we kind of did a little bit of homework before we start. Not too much homework, but a little bit of homework before we started chatting. And I know that you used to work with Simon Schuster. You were with Transworld for a little while as well. obviously these are pretty much household names, as certainly within the publishing world. I know a lot of people move from publishing house to publishing house. How have you felt being with HarperNorth now? I mean, these are all very different companies to work for. I mean, do you think you've brought anything from other publishing houses with you that you've maybe brought to the Harper team that you knew they needed, or if there was anything that you think you've learned from other publishers that you've continued doing to this day, that you'd kind of point at being one of the big the kind of the big tricks to the trade almost, anything that you've kind of learned on your way up that you use on a regular basis now?
That's a good question. So when I joined Simon Schuster, I literally could not believe that I was working in publishing, and I was so skint back then that I used to get the train to Euston. I lived in Reading at the time. I used to get the train to Euston, and I walked from Euston to Gray's Inn Road because it saved me, I think it was 40 quid a month. And to give you an idea of how skint I was, and I used to take my lunch every single day, which was a wrap with hummus and a grated carrot on it. And that's what I used to have pretty much every day because I was so brassic. And I remember saying to somebody, I just can't believe that I work in publishing. And I said, like, I walk through Bloomsbury every morning. Isn't that exciting? Do you feel that? And he was like, no, not really.
Yeah.
But I think so. I think when I landed at Simon and Schuster, it felt like another world, and that enthusiasm lasted for a long time. And I still sometimes feel like that. And I think I kind of joined Simon and Schuster at a really interesting time because those days of kind of publishing lunches were still kind of a thing, really. And it seemed like incredibly glamorous, and there were loads of celebrities, and it was that was a really, really fun time. It was a good place to be an assistant. And then I got promoted and worked there for about 3.5 years. Then I moved to Transworld, which is where I'd done some work experience, and they'd offered me a couple of jobs and it hadn't been quite right. And then I moved there and I was there for 6 years. And I think the thing that I really learned from Transworld in particular, but I think PRH, is the importance of just being incredibly diligent. You were working on a big team, but you had to be across the detail on all the campaigns. So it was quite I sometimes felt quite anxious because I sometimes felt like I was slightly struggling once or twice, but it was a really, really good place to work. And the other thing that Transworld had was massive marketing budgets, because they had these big, successful authors like Dan Brown and Bill Bryson, and you could really get your teeth stuck into big marketing campaigns with really huge budgets, and I did some quite experimental things with some of the campaigns because you knew that as long as you were covering the bases, there was a little bit of leeway to be creative, and you were on a big team. So I think there were 11 or 12 marketers on that team, so there was an in-house copywriter and an in-house designer, and that was incredible because you could say, oh, I've had an idea, and then the copywriter would would be able to bring you like 12 different cover ideas, and then and in terms of copy lines for outdoor advertising, you might have 30 or 40 different versions to talk through, and then you could say, oh, I like these 3, and then she take them away and come back a week later with another 40 brilliant ideas, and then you could test them with the consumer insight there. So that was a really important part of my career as well. And I was at Penguin Random House for 6 years, so I kind of really learned my craft in many ways there. And then when I moved to HarperCollins, so I moved straight from Transworld to HarperNorth, but because of lockdown, I was still living in London, but kind of working on Northern books for a few months. And I think the kind of things that I've really enjoyed at HarperNorth is it has quite a flat structure, and I think people do listen to one another. And in another place that I worked, people would say, "Oh, a good idea doesn't care who had it," and I feel like at HarperNorth that's the case, that people do listen to one another, and that's been quite interesting. But it suits my mindset to have lots of freedom to be able to kind of pull out loads of different ideas and then see what's working. And we've had successes based on bringing authors along and kind of saying, oh, would this idea work? And then having that freedom to do that has been quite unusual at this stage of my career, and to be able to take on publicity too, to kind of broaden out my experience, not just from marketing, but to publicity as well. So I've really, really enjoyed that. And I think just that idea of doing something new, because actually, other publishers I think have kind of talked about having northern offices, and obviously Hachette have done a brilliant job in having their regional offices, but certainly at the time that HarperNorth was kind of being talked about, they were one of the only trade publishers, to have that willingness to take a chance. And I think there are loads of absolutely amazing indie and small publishers in the North, and we very much know that we are a trade publisher. We do things in quite a specific way. We're not particularly avant-garde because we are an industry and it's a business. And I think I love that kind of experimental type of writing, and I love reading it. But it probably wouldn't be right for the HarperNorth list. But we've kind of carved out hopefully a space on the literary landscape in the North. And one of the things that have done is said, we're not necessarily going to publish very much poetry. We're not going to publish, say, military history, because that's not our speciality. So we're not doing everything. We're kind of bringing the things that we know how to do really well.
Sorry, James is just looking at the list and I'm staring over his shoulder.
Sorry, yeah. Just while you were finishing, I was like, oh, I wonder how many books you've done. I can see it's like 86 titles or something like that available.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I think this will obviously be looking a little bit further ahead as well. So this might include next year's titles too. Like 86, which is mad, because when was it 2020 that it established? Is that right?
Yeah, it was due. Do you know, it was 4 years today that I started working here.
Oh wow! Oh well, congratulations. And does it feel like 4 years, or has it flown?
Sometimes it feels like it's been about 40 years, but it really, really has flown, like particularly the last 2 years, because it's been so busy. But it's been really, really enjoyable.
Brilliant. Yeah. I wonder if now is a good time. Well, now that you're saying you enjoy your job, should we kind of wrap up? What we like to do at the end of our chats is ask people, because we're unpicking like the life cycle of a book, and we're trying to talk to everyone who's involved in the making of a book, the people who maybe go a little bit in the background and people don't know, or the obvious things. And I'm wondering who do you deal with on a day-to-day basis that you think we might want to chat? It doesn't have to be the person, it could just be the role. But is there anyone you think we should chat to for the podcast so people can learn a bit more of an insight of the life cycle of a book?
Oh, that's interesting. So to give today as an example, we had a meeting with our managing director, our sales team, our ebook people. I think there was somebody from finance there. And I've also had a meeting with our consumer insight team today. So they did some trend forecasting. So they were telling me the types of things that people are going to be looking for and buying. So they monitor quite closely upcoming trends, but also things like TikTok keywords, which is always really strange. But then in a year's time, you're like, oh, I see now. I see why there are so many books about narwhals or whatever. So I think that the people who, they're not unsung, but I think the sales are always really interesting because they have lots of insight into, the high street and what is working really well there. So I think somebody from sales. The other one that I think is always quite interesting is the production team, because they're the ones who have to take a book from this wild idea to something that people hold in their hand, and they can do really incredible creative work, particularly around covers and around finishes and glitter and foil, and obviously they have to make sure that they're eco-friendly. Sometimes they do things with like cutouts of teeth marks in the corners of books, so I think production are always fascinating, and I love the kind of paper choices, and those sorts of like quite geeky conversations that they have. The other thing, but I don't think they would ever do a podcast, is legal are really interesting, and they play a really, really good.
I mean, we can't get anyone to actually talk about money either, so it's like finance, legal. When people talk about, when you talk about a budget, a marketing budget, and things like author advances, these are the things that people just can't talk about. And it's really, when you talk about, oh, we had a really big marketing budget for this book and a small one, and I'm like, what does big or small mean? Is it like 100 versus 100,000? So there's a lot of things like that where I don't think we will get answers, but like we're trying to get small answers.
Yeah, and there's a lot of the kind of the nitty gritty of it, and it really is the nuts and bolts that eventually we're going to want to really ask these quite tricky. We don't want to be too confrontational, and we don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. So we want to have kind of light conversation, and find out kind of what your role is and kind of what you're up to and kind of how that fits within the big picture. But I mean, we are just really nosy, so we do want to know what that author advance was, or we do want to know how big a budget is, or I mean, you were just, while you were talking about kind of the production, I mean, I was very lucky to be able to come down to HarperCollins maybe about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, and they'd just been working on The Binding by Bridget Collins. And they did a presentation from the designers, and the kind of production team did a presentation about all of the different versions of the covers that they came up with. I love that kind of stuff. I'm so geeky about that kind of design and kind of the art management of it all. And and I was fortunate enough to sit in on like a cover pitch as well. So like designers would bring maybe 5 or 6 designs to the table, and it was like X Factor for books. And it got like so shockingly cutthroat, where they were like, yes, yes, no, no. And it's like you were saying before, it's like you could ask them for 30 versions and you could just pick 3. I'm like, that's so shockingly small a number. But I love that, just having these conversations kind of shines a light on just a little bit of the industry like that, and having these sort of conversations about covers, or conversations about learning how TikTok works and all that kind of stuff. I think it's just really fascinating, and I think it's making it a really human story within this otherwise kind of slightly alien industry that I think a lot of people just don't know.
But it's doing it for both sides, because I come at from the writing, you come at kind of from the selling. But it's stuff that everyone wants. A lot of people who want to write want to know, people who want to be in publishing want to know. So it's all just so useful. And I remember The Binding, just because he's got up on the screen, when it came into the bookshop, because we were both working at the bookshop. And when they sent the proofs, they sent it with just beautiful. I can't even remember what it was, but it came in a lovely box. There was like tissue paper, like tea bags, and all those lovely things that make a bookseller remember. So when it comes onto the shelf, you go, "Ooh, they sent us lovely things with that book.
Yeah.
Let's put it at the front." And it sounds really shallow and simple, but it works a treat.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you can only do that with a certain number of books each year, and it also has to be books that that the booksellers are going to love themselves. So we've got a book now called The Burnings by Naomi Kelsey, and it's a fantastic book, but we did t-shirts for the booksellers, which are absolutely beautiful, and we've got a few more to send out in the run-up to autumn, because it's actually out now in paperback, but we know that Naomi will be doing lots of activity in the run up to Halloween, because who doesn't love a witch at Halloween? So, you know, we obviously wouldn't do t-shirts for every title. And when you say, you know, whether a small budget is £100, sometimes all it takes is £100. But I think, you know, if it was something that was like amazing, people will just, you know, it'll stick in people's minds. You know, more than anything else, the thing that you can't replicate is that word of mouth. So what we want to be doing is talking to the booksellers and saying, oh my gosh, you're going to love this. And part of that is knowing not necessarily all booksellers' taste, but knowing like some booksellers will love this book, and then making sure that they have copies of it. So that's always like quite a fun part of the job. And you know, thinking, oh, you know, how would they like to window dress this book, and what would we like them to say about it when they talk to their customers? And that's always really fascinating, because I think you know, we don't know all the time which books will kind of catch a fire underneath them, but we can, you know, identify our booksellers normally like a book about cats or Japan or whatever, and then hopefully serve them, you know, not necessarily more of what they like, but something that they know that they can sell to their customers.
I think that brings us perfectly kind of full circle, you know, back to the readers. And I guess that's really what it's all about. And for us, especially talking life cycle of the book, I mean, it is a life cycle. And once we get back to the readers, it starts from them again, you know, and should feed back into the industry about what they are into and what they enjoyed. You know, if you really enjoyed Naomi Kelsey, you know, next year we've got X, Y, and Z, you know, and I guess that's kind of how it should work. And that's how it worked for me as a bookseller. And it's great to hear that that's kind of how it works for publishers as well.
Yeah, and I think we're all, you know, massive readers. Like, we all want people to just read more, and you know, it comes down to there's lots of enthusiasm across the industry for all of our books. And you know, we know really the kind of challenge isn't other books. You know, they're not our enemies. The enemy is like people looking at their phone or just going to bed, or you know, Netflix and all the distractions of life. That's the real thing that we're battling against. So you know, if everybody spent 10-15 minutes a day reading, then you know, nobody would be kind of struggling to sell any of their books, because people would be, you know, buying more, you know, more frequently from the supermarket, from indie bookshops, and buying on their Kindles. So you know, we realize that everybody's busy, but kind of thinking about those times in people's days where they can carve out a bit of peace so they can read is really important.
And the world would just be a better place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if, you know, if kids were able to, you know, more kids were able to grow up reading, you know, that would be fantastic for them. And you know, that's the key, really, like educationally and just fun wise, like entertainment wise too, because I think young readers are like the future, really, aren't they?
Yeah, I was with my friend and her baby, and she bought some books for a toddler, and the baby was kind of chewing it, so she was involved, but she's still learning how to use a book. She knew to go like, I am miming a baby, opening the page. But even seeing babies learning what a book is and how to operate it, you know, it means that when they can actually read it, it's just all those things. It's so good to see. And now I work for kids' books festivals. I just want to press books into children's hands and hope they never stop enjoying like the magic of it. Really, it's that gap. It's the gap once they get into education when they're about 13 and the drop off, and how you pick them back up. And that's where the social media and stuff can come in, because then you can get them back sooner than maybe otherwise would. Yeah,
it's a wild world.
It is.
Yeah. So turning the world into readers, that's the end game.
Brilliant. Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to stop. Alice, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you learned something new, like we always do.
Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our Substack to be the first to hear more.
And you can find us in all the places you usually find your podcasts.
Until next time, keep reading.